Now, from the Pope John Paul II Cultural Center in Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome to The World Over Live. Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens recently announced his retirement, and the handicapping of a replacement has begun in earnest. Ed Whelan of the Ethics and Public Policy Center is here to discuss the likely candidates that the Obama administration has in mind. And the clergy sex abuse controversy continues this week. Calls for legal action against the Pope and the Vatican are being tossed around. Here to discuss the legal aspects of the situation is attorney and former member of the Bishops' National Review Board here in the U.S., Mr. Robert Bennett. And we'll bring you a recent interview I did with Canadian fiddling sensations Natalie MacMaster and Donnell Leahy. We intended to bring that to you about a month ago, but we have it for you tonight. You won't want to miss that. But first, here's the brief news from the world over this week. In response to the deluge of negative media surrounding the sex abuse crisis, the Vatican on Monday issued a set of guidelines explaining how the Church responds to sex abuse complaints involving priests. The guidelines are not new, however. Contrary to some media reports, they are rather a simplified summary of the policy laid out by the Vatican in 2001. Among the highlights, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, or CDF, has jurisdiction over sex abuse complaints. All credible accusations of sexual abuse are to be forwarded to the CDF for disciplinary action. The local bishop, quote, always retains power to protect children by restricting the activities of any priest, the summary notes. Reporting of crimes to the appropriate authorities should always be followed. The summary also outlines the possible disciplinary responses to sexual abuse, including dismissal from the priesthood. The guidelines were released on the Vatican's brand new media blog, which debuted on Monday. The blog was launched in hopes that it would improve the Church's communications with media outlets. And radical atheism's dynamic duo isn't letting the latest media coverage of the Church go by without a bit of demagoguery. Authors Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins are leading an effort to have Pope Benedict arrested during a September visit to the UK. Hitchens has retained human rights lawyers who are preparing a case to charge Pope Benedict over his alleged cover-up of sex abuse in the Catholic Church. The atheists say the Pope can be arrested by exploiting a British law that does not extend diplomatic immunity to members of governments not recognized by the United Nations. The late Chilean dictator, Augusto Pinochet, was arrested under such pretenses in 1998. For more on the story, go to my Seen and Unseen blog at EWTN.com. It's the tiny thing in the gray box on the right-hand side of the homepage. And Chicago's controversial Southside priest, Father Michael Pfleger, is back in the news this week. He was given a Racial Justice Lifetime Achievement Award by the Archdiocese of Chicago. Father Pfleger has in the past defended his friends Louis Farrakhan and President Obama's spiritual father, Reverend Jeremiah Wright. In 2008, Father Pfleger mocked Hillary Clinton's skin color and accused her of white entitlement in her race against Barack Obama. In a release, the Archdiocesan Office of Racial Justice said Father Pfleger received the award for his life of service in pursuit of dismantling racism, injustice, and inequalities on behalf of African Americans and all people of color. And in a related note, during his homily on Divine Mercy Sunday, Father Pfleger offered this endorsement of female ordination.
They had run out on him. They had turned their backs on him. They had left the one they had been with for 3 years, 24/7, and now they ran away from him when he most needed them. Only John at the foot of the cross and the women. That's why there should be women priests. That's why there should be married priests. That's why there should be women bishops and women cardinals. And
good thing it was Mercy Sunday. And 2 landmark abortion bills were signed into law this week in Nebraska. The first, called the Abortion Pain Prevention Act, changes the standard used to restrict the procedure from viability of the fetus outside the womb to whether the fetus can feel pain during abortion. In effect, elective abortions past 20 weeks gestation are now outlawed. The second law will require doctors and other health professionals to determine whether those seeking abortions were pressured by anyone. Doctors are also required to assess and inform women whether they have risk factors that could lead to mental or physical problems after an abortion. Abortion rights groups are arguing that both laws are unconstitutional. Court challenges are expected. And in California, an attempt to repeal Proposition 8, which defined marriage as the union of one man and one woman, will not be on the November ballot. Gay rights advocates announced that they have failed to qualify for a measure that would repeal the same-sex marriage ban. Monday was the deadline for submitting the nearly 695,000 signatures needed to put the measure on the ballot. The chairman of Restore Equality campaign said same-sex marriage supporters would try again in 2012. And for the first time since the Jubilee celebration, the Shroud of Turin is on public display. Saturday's pilgrims to the northwest Italian town were the first of the expected 2 million to see what many believe to be the burial cloth of Jesus. The cloth bears the faded image of the face of Christ and the markings of his wounds during his passion and death. Pilgrims will be allowed about a 3 to 5 minute chance to gaze at the cloth softly illuminated in Turin's cathedral. Pope Benedict will also be among those pilgrims. He'll be visiting the shroud during its 6 weeks display. The Holy Father will travel to Turin on May 2nd. And April 16th is the Pope's birthday, so a happy and blessed birthday to His Holiness. At 83 years old, Pope Benedict ranks as the 10th oldest pontiff in the last 500 years. But it will be 10 more years before he catches up to history's oldest living pontiff, Pope Leo XIII of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He led the Church well past his 93rd birthday. May Pope Benedict have many more. When we return, the worldwide clergy sex abuse controversy continues. Now there's a plan afoot to arrest the Pope when he visits Britain. Attorney and former National Review Board member Robert Bennett is here to talk about it. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Our first guest is a well-known attorney here in Washington, D.C. He was a member of the USCCB's National Review Board from 2002 to 2004. Now, you'll remember the National Review Board was established to collaborate with the U.S. bishops to prevent the sexual abuse of minors in the U.S. within the Church. Here to give us his take on the current accusations directed at the Vatican and Pope Benedict XVI is Robert Bennett. Bob, thanks for being here.
Hi, Raymond. Nice
Pleasure to have you
again
on the set again and being with us. Let's back up for a moment. You're an attorney. You've been at the heart of very high-profile cases. When you look at what's happening here in the media play of this event, Pope Benedict being inserted, if you will, into the middle of each and every abuse case, going back decades, what is at play here? What do you see as what is the public missing?
Well, I just think there's a combination of things happening. I have no doubt that there are some people with questionable motives here, but I do not think the Church or the Vatican is helping itself. I mean, you have a very severe crisis worldwide. Terrible things have happened. And when somebody in Rome stands up and says, well, the devil works through priests, or the circling of the wagons, I think it's doing a terrible disservice to the pontiff.
It makes them look as if they're somehow hiding something else because of the approach you're saying.
Absolutely right.
Let's talk about these two federal courts in the United States, and this is something we've reported on it, but very few other outlets I've seen give it much attention. Behind the scenes, this Jeff Anderson, who's the real lead attorney, the plaintiff's attorney, driving a lot of these cases and also responsible for a lot of the leaks we're seeing in the public arena. Jeff Anderson is involved in some cases in Oregon and Kentucky where the federal courts have said what for the first time?
Well, the federal courts have said that the Foreign Sovereignties Immunities Act, which I'll explain briefly in a moment, does not protect the Vatican, which you know is a sovereign state.
Right.
I think it got its sovereignty in 1929 and or something like
part of the
that.
Lateran
And
Treaty.
because there is an exception for torts or wrongdoing committed against somebody in the United States. And 10 years ago, I would have told you that no case like that would even get any traction. Now we have two circuits, the highest courts below the Supreme Court, saying that, that you may very well have jurisdiction. And the Ninth Circuit is the one that I think is the most the dangerous, because the Supreme Court has asked the Solicitor General of the United States for their opinion about whether there is jurisdiction. And that very often is the precursor of the court taking a case. So that case could go up to the court. I think you also, Raymond, have to remember there is a world of difference between winning a case and bringing a case. And I do not think that at the end of the day they would be successful, any plaintiff, in a case against the Vatican or the Pontiff.
You think it's too tenuous a
tenuous.
connection?
How on earth is any plaintiff going to be able to show that a priest who abuses a child was acting within the scope of his employment? And that is the terminology we're dealing with. I mean, it's impossible. But don't forget, enormous damage is done just by being able to get into court, because it means that you have at your disposal all of the discovery, the liberal discovery processes we have in the United States.
And all those files and all those memos and everything would have to be opened up and
this
deposited
ties
in the
into
public.
the public relations, because plaintiffs' lawyers will schedule a deposition of a cardinal, an archbishop, or whatever, and then announce to the press that that's taking place, and unless there is a protective order, releasing the deposition to the public. And you know, as a superb reporter, you're always looking for something to trigger a story.
Yep, and a sensational story.
So this is a very serious matter.
Let's talk for a moment about your experience on that National Review Board. I know your firm was instrumental in going in, interacting with these dioceses, reviewing the files in many cases, and you yourself interviewed a good number of these bishops. Remind people, it's been almost 10 years now. What was your experience there? What did you learn from these bishops? Were they totally clueless? And aren't they the first line of defense here?
I think that many bishops, to be candid, were clueless. And I'm not saying they acted out of bad purpose or bad motive, but there was such a paranoia about bringing scandal to the church that they did not react the way one should react when there is a crisis. There was a lot of denial. There was, well, this is an American problem caused by the press. This was caused by the Vatican councils. This was caused by our secular society. Well, that's all nonsense. I mean, some of these things may contribute, but that's not what the cause was. They brought a lot of dysfunctional men into the church.
Didn't screen them properly.
Didn't screen them,
in.
didn't help them. And so we have had this crisis. And it wasn't the cause of the American press, as we're now learning. I kept hearing that this was an American problem and no more. And I kept saying, Cardinal, Bishop, Father, this is a human behavior problem.
And you see it in other,
and
the report you did and the John Jay College subsequently did showed the incidents of this are happening across the society in higher instances in other institutions, but nonetheless it was happening here, and there's a certain responsibility and expectation within the church. That's
certainly
members
look
expect.
What our church holds itself out to be. I mean, the Lord said, you know, Jesus said, what you do to these children, tie a rock around your leg and toss yourself in the ocean or the river.
Better that you'd never been born.
Better you'd never been born.
Now, let's talk, since so much of this coverage is now, and because of the litigation moving forward, they're trying to connect these cases to Ratzinger, to the present Pope, Benedict XVI. You had a meeting with him of some consequence. Tell me what it was like when you were on the National Review Board. I know a few of you traveled over to Rome. You kind of got the cold shoulder from a number of offices there.
Well, we got the apostolic delegate at the time in the United States wouldn't even meet with us.
But you traveled to Rome, and you did meet with the
current Pope. We traveled to Rome, and there were some cardinals who were very helpful to us. And we arranged to meet with then Cardinal Ratzinger, who could argue was the second most powerful person in Rome. He was the head of the Office of the Congregation of Faith. And this was no courtesy meeting. Ann Burke, a justice in Chicago, and Bill Burley and I, Bill was the former chairman of Scripps, we met with Cardinal Ratzinger, and we met with him for close to 2.5 hours. This was not a 5-minute courtesy meeting. And he obviously was deeply concerned about it, and I must say, we took great heart when he visited the United States. And I mean, I think, Raymond, he might not have even gotten off the plane, or at least it was right after he got off.
It was en route where he talked about it.
First thing he talked about was this terrible crisis. So we took heart. So I don't know the facts, and I don't know if anybody knows all of the facts of the cases that they are trying to pull him into. But what should be done is those facts should be determined, they should be disclosed, and should be put in an appropriate context instead of this circling of the wagon. I think it is very harmful to the pontiff for this circling the circling of the wagon and simply attributing the worst of motives to people who are raising questions.
The questions, though, you have to admit, Bob, as the facts do come out in some of these cases, like this priest in California, they said, well, Ratzinger, Cardinal Ratzinger, delayed the defrocking of this priest. Well, the fact is, the guy was already a convicted felon. He'd been stripped of his priestly ministry at that point. He was sitting in jail, and they had the canonical process to go through, which, as you know, before 2001, was a slow, glacially paced thing. Once Ratzinger got in there and took control of these cases in 2001, he did hasten. In fact, he was the person driving the bus on this thing, trying to hasten the process and bring justice in these cases among many of the people in the Vatican, certainly in my estimation.
But this is not being said, Raymond. So you appreciate, you know, as a fine reporter, the rule of crisis management is get all the bad facts out, give your explanation saying it will never happen again, and in his case, here's what I did and here's what I didn't do and here's where it was.
And put the exclamation point on the story.
But this story has not gotten out.
Bob, if you were called tomorrow by the Vatican and they said, Mr. Bennett, what would you recommend we do now? What would you tell them?
Other than hiring me to do it, even if it's pro bono, because the last one was.
Well, that was a big pro bono job, I might add.
It was, but I love the church, and the church has been good to me. And
what are they doing wrong right now? Is it primarily the PR war they're losing?
There does not appear to be an organized crisis management approach. And what I would do is I would say someone like me would take control of the whole process, get the facts out like you just articulated, and
because there is no one appointed on the other side of this. You've got Jeff Anderson and the charges and nothing.
You know, you're the first show I've done on this current go-round, but I've had calls from other networks. They have nobody. You've got to take charge of the thing. You've got to control the PR. And good PR very often is accurate reporting of the facts, just like you did. And to communicate to the world the interest that the Holy Pontiff had about this.
Yeah, and his concern for the victims and wanting to respect the rights of the priest, but hastening once he realized that there was, were guilty parties here. He rooted these offenders out. I mean,
but
it was something
that
like
story
3,000 cases.
has not gotten out. And I think that it's the fault of whoever is in charge of handling this thing.
Yeah, the bureaucracy.
You know, part of the problem, I think, is the church moves slowly in years, decades.
Centuries.
Centuries. I'm glad you said that. In crisis management, in this 24/7 culture, you got to act really quickly.
You need it now. They need it yesterday.
So their defenses are not getting out there. And
I want to switch gears a minute and just quiz you on this. Do you think there's any credibility to the, I guess right now, the story that you have a group of atheists, principally Dawkins and Chris Hitchens here in the U.S., saying they want to place Pope Benedict under arrest when he goes there in September for his papal visit and charge him in the International Criminal Court with crimes against humanity? Is there sufficient evidence at this point to even suggest that he's guilty of crimes against humanity?
No, I don't think so, and I think that is not going to happen. But don't underestimate, in international law, there is a concept called universal jurisdiction, which British courts, contrary to the British government, take an interest in. This is where you get, a foreign dignitary, who has slaughtered hundreds of thousands of people. So, of course, when Hitchens says that, people pay attention. There is a possibility, I suppose, that something like that could happen.
And they could waive his immunity, because right now the Vatican would say it's a sovereign state, he's the head of the state, therefore he has diplomatic immunity no matter where he goes.
Yeah, but the problem with all this is I don't think realistically that would ever happen. But wouldn't it be a terrible thing if whoever advises the Holy Father on his trips said, these courts are changing. There's this concept of universal jurisdiction, which the British courts are taking an interest in. Maybe you shouldn't make this trip. Why don't we play it safe? What a terrible thing. Why take a chance? I tell clients in other contexts, look, you probably could come over here to the States and it'd be fine, but why take a chance? Why should the Holy Father have even to think about something like this? And also, things don't always work the way they should work. I know from practicing 40 years, you could get somebody on your program and say, that's preposterous, it would never happen. Some wacko judge who wants to go down in history as the man who arrested the Pope could sign an order. Now, would it last? Would it get reversed? Could a good lawyer change it? Of course. But why go there? So I
think it's a critical moment, really, for his papacy.
It's a very critical moment. That's why the United States of America is very concerned about engaging in treaties where we have this International Court of Justice. We know you get a fair trial here in the States.
We don't know about the International Court.
But we don't know about. And even if something like that issued, Raymond, and the Pope said, no, I'm not going to, then there's another story. Pope refuses
to abide by the criminal court that the Vatican supported.
That the Vatican supported, exactly right. I forgot that.
Yeah, no, remember, John Paul II was in support of the International Criminal Court because it was there to protect people against human rights abuses.
That just proves be careful what you ask for, because sometimes you get it.
This is true. Final question. When you look at the international picture and the scope of this thing, you were covering and were intimately involved in the American version of this 10 years ago.
I was the primary investigator for the board on this crisis.
Is it the same? Do you see the same reasoning behind this, why this crisis has taken place around the world? Is it the bishops weren't paying attention, they were allowing the bad guys into the ministry and then didn't know how to react, or were more interested in sort of protecting the church?
I think, look, in fairness, I can speak with some authority on the U.S. situation, but my educated guess, it's many of the same things, the fear of avoiding scandal, allowing people into the church who were dysfunctional human beings. I mean, I interviewed one or two priests who were dysfunctional human beings. They should not have been priests. And years ago, If you had said, Raymond, you know, I think we should do a psychological evaluation, somebody would have said, well, who are you to question a man's calling when God wants him to join? Mm-hmm. Well, they've learned a lesson a very hard way. My guess is the reasons are very, very similar, and my guess is that there'd be very, very little difference.
Bob Bennett, I thank you for sharing.
Raymond, it's always a pleasure.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine. Bob Bennett is a senior partner here in Washington, D.C. at the international law firm of Hogan and Lovells. We thank you for being with us again, Bob. And you can always drop us a line at worldover@EWTN.com. Up next, we'll be talking about President Obama's Supreme Court nominees who might fill the void left by John Paul Stevens. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. My next guest is an attorney and the president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center here in Washington, D.C. He is director of the Program on the Constitution, the Courts, and the Culture, and an expert on constitutional law and the judicial confirmation process. He joins us tonight to discuss the upcoming retirement of Justice John Paul Stevens. Would you welcome to the program Edward Whelan. Thank you so much for being here, Ed.
Thank you, Raymond.
Let's talk for a moment about what the president said when it became apparent that John Paul Stevens was going to resign. Here's what the president said from the Rose Garden. Take a look.
I will seek someone in the coming weeks with similar qualities: an independent mind, a record of excellence and integrity, a fierce dedication to the rule of law, and a keen understanding of how the law affects the daily lives of the American people. It will also be someone who, like Justice Stevens, knows that in a democracy, powerful interests must not be allowed to drown out the voices of ordinary citizens.
Ed, put this in some context for us. We have the president saying that we mustn't have a justice who doesn't understand that the interests of some shouldn't overwhelm the interests of the little guy. Your thoughts on this and this approach to appointing a justice?
Well, I think this is a rhetorical game that President Obama is playing. If you're really committed to not drowning out the voices of citizens, he would abandon his embrace of liberal judicial activism. He would look for justices who would restore to the political processes those issues that the Constitution leaves there. But remember, it was just last year and during the campaign that President Obama was spouting his empathy standard, the notion that he would pick justices who would rule from their heart and indulge their values in deciding cases. Now that standard didn't play very well. He's trying to shift, but I think that was clearly the real Obama.
Now we keep hearing from the president, and he said this in the past, that he doesn't want a conservative judicial activist. What does he want?
Well, no one should want any sort of judicial activist, but what President Obama is looking for are liberal judicial activists, folks who will advance his agenda, entrench his agenda in the guise of the Constitution. He's made clear that he's a wholehearted supporter of Roe, which has no basis at all in the Constitution and which has poisoned American politics for nearly 4 decades now. On issue after issue, same-sex marriage, he pretends to be against it, but he's going to appoint justices who are likely to vote to invent a federal constitutional right to same-sex marriage. And again, you see this on a whole host of issues.
What possibility is there for stopping this advance of a very activist appointment, as it is rumored that Sonia Sotomayor may very well be?
Oh, I'm sure she will be. Well, look, it's very difficult in the current political alignment. You have 59 Democrats and you have a president who's going to make a bad pick. The key really to turning the court around is to get a good president elected in 2012 and to have enough senators who will confirm that president's nominees. Unfortunately, 2008 was a huge blown opportunity. We made real progress on the court with Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Alito, very close to turning the court around, especially with the entirely predictable retirements coming. But unfortunately, it looks like President Obama will have the opportunity to entrench those seats for another 30 years.
What should be the qualities of a Supreme Court justice that we should be looking for as a country?
Well, apart from the certain objective ones that everyone can agree on, intellect and integrity. What we need is someone who has a well-grounded theory of constitutional interpretation, that a theory that yields right answers and that can distinguish wrong answers, a theory that recognizes that our Constitution, our system of representative government, leaves a vast bulk of issues to the American people to decide, and that justices need a clear warrant in the Constitution if they're going to override those processes.
Pat Leahy, who's the chairman of the committee, Judiciary Committee, is already saying, look, we want a civil process here. So basically, let's not have any vocal dissent or vocal debate about this pick. Your thoughts on this sort of preemptive move? We don't even have a pick yet.
Well, the process should be civil. It was civil last year with Sonia Sotomayor, a lot more civil than with the hearings on Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Alito, where Senator Leahy and others were flinging all sorts of charges about racism and sexism and ethics. Look, Pat Leahy has done as much as anyone to degrade the civility of the confirmation process. But no, of course it should be a civil process. It's one where I hope very much that Republican senators will encourage a full-fledged exploration of judicial philosophy and have this in a high-toned way.
Ed, I want to run down some of the potential picks, the people who are emerging in the media at least and being leaked via the White House into the public domain. Elena Kagan, this is the U.S. Solicitor General, or Elena Kagan rather, appointed by President Obama. Now, tell us about her background before she was Solicitor General.
Well, Elena Kagan has been a law school academic for years now. She actually was a year behind me in law school. I knew her a bit then. We were on law review together at Harvard. She, while dean of Harvard Law School, really engaged in some extremist rhetoric against the don't ask, don't tell policy on homosexuals in the military. And even signed her name to a brief that the Supreme Court rejected unanimously, taking a crazy position on that law. Huh.
She also booted the military off of Harvard.
She sure did, until until federal dollars were at risk, and then she said, well, okay, my principles go only so far. But she again was quite vehement in her rhetoric. And I'll emphasize, as Solicitor General, has taken actions that operate to undermine the very federal laws she's obligated to defend: Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and the Defense of Marriage Act.
But don't you see as her promotion to Solicitor General by the President as sort of a platform from which he can launch her to clearly some sort of higher place?
Well, it certainly was an effort, I think, to give her a credential. At the time she was named Solicitor General, she had not argued a single case anywhere ever.
Really?
Which is quite remarkable. And again, her background had largely been as a dean, and then as a law professor before then. She hasn't written all that much, and I think it's fair to say that if she is a nominee, she might well be the nominee with the least relevant experience in decades.
Tell us about Diane Wood, serves on the 7th Circuit. What is her background? This is a name we have heard over and over and over again in recent years.
Right. Diane Wood also has a background as an academic. She's an antitrust scholar. She joined the 7th Circuit in 1995 and has been on that court since. She has an incendiary record on a whole range of hot-button culture war issues. I think there's no one in the country who has a more extreme record than Diane Wood does on abortion. But you also look at statements she's made on same-sex marriage, on reliance on foreign and international law, in redefining the Constitution, stripping under God out of the Pledge of Allegiance, and so on.
She's really out there. I mean, she's far left.
She's very far left on those issues. She has a much more moderate record on business law issues, and some people are trying to elevate those issues.
Soft pedal the nomination that way.
Right.
Let's talk about Merrick Garland. He serves here in Washington, D.C. on the Circuit Court of Appeals here. He's the moderate of the bunch, or so we hear. Tell us about him.
Well, Merrick Garland has been on the D.C. Circuit Court since the late 90s. He also was appointed by President Clinton. He has earned, I think it's fair to say, a very good reputation among his conservative colleagues. And there's nothing glaring in his record. I have no illusions that if he's appointed that he would help move the court in the right direction. At most he might move it more slowly in the wrong direction. But I think of the candidates who are being talked about, he's probably the best of the bunch. Though I emphasize, when I say the candidates being talked about, that's quite a limitation.
Yeah, that's a rotten bunch, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Now, he also, we have to remember, John Paul Stevens, when he came to the court, people imagined he was going to be a sort of moderate to conservative as well, yes?
In fact, he started out that way. He was always idiosyncratic, but he really moved much further left in the last 20 years or so. He has this sort of self-serving myth that he didn't change, the court did. But when you look at his record on issues like abortion, racial preferences, the death penalty, which somehow after 30 years he decided was is now categorically impermissible. You see this leftward lurch.
Radical move, yeah, and a slow progression. Janet Napolitano, we're not hearing much about her now. She's currently head of Homeland Security. Is this is this just a media fixation, or do you think this is a real possibility?
Well, in some ways it's difficult to take seriously. Whenever I mention the name, people tend to laugh.
Yeah, well, she was a governor. She's really got no...
Well, she has a background as a U.S. attorney, and she has a significant legal background. I think, though, that she's simply, as Secretary of DHS, she's earned the nickname Janet Incompetano. And, you know, the Christmas Day panty bomber and her reaction to that, the system worked, I think makes it difficult to take her seriously. I mean, if she were doing a good job at DHS, it would be irresponsible to move her from that important position to the court. That she's not doing a good job makes it all the stranger to move her to the court. But President Obama has said he likes the idea of a politician as justice, not surprisingly, that he's looking for a governor or former governor type. So I think she might well be on the short list for that reason.
But do you think she could be a leader? I mean, in the way that right now you have John Roberts and others sort of providing leadership on the court. She's not capable of that. Diane Wood would be that person, right?
Well, it's always difficult to predict the internal dynamic of the court. For the most part, the justices tend to operate
independently
on their own. It's true that Justice Stevens managed to make himself the leader of the liberals over the last 15 years or so. But you know, it's hard to tell. I don't really see the political skills there.
Let's get into the other nominee that we're hearing about, Leah Ward Sears. She was on the court, former Chief Justice in Georgia. Your thoughts about her?
Well, I think she's probably an unlikely pick. I think there are folks on the left who will be distrustful of her because she's said to be friendly with Justice Thomas, and she's also been affiliated with a group in New York that has helped lead the way against same-sex marriage. At the same time, she has a lot in her record that I think would concern conservatives. I don't quite see it breaking for her.
Yeah. That association with the Institute for American Values, you already have the White House officials saying, some liberals are very upset about this, sort of damning the nomination before it even happens. So
she also has an ethics issue from a couple of years ago involving the campaign that I think the White House would just want to stay away from.
Your best guess, looking at this roster of possibilities, who will Obama pick?
Well, I think that the default selection, if he can't find anyone who knocks his socks off, is probably going to be Elena Kagan, primarily because of her age. She turns 50 in just a couple weeks, in fact, which makes her significantly younger than most of the other folks here we're talking about.
Yeah, and they have a relationship as well, yes?
They do. I don't know the details of it, but she was at Chicago when Barack Obama was at Chicago, and obviously he thought highly enough of her to select her as Solicitor General. You know, again, I understand she is a person with impressive in her own right. So I wouldn't surprise me at all if she's developed a very good relationship with him.
Very good. Ed Whelan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Raymond.
Please come back. If you're interested in finding out more about the Ethics and Public Policy Center or to keep track of Ed Whelan's writings on the Constitution, the courts, and the culture, you can visit www.eppc.org. eppc.org. My next guests have appeared on our annual Christmas specials and jointly performed at EWTN's 25th anniversary family celebration in Philadelphia a few years back. They are both Canadian fiddle virtuosos, she of the Cape Breton tradition, while he is a master of the Scottish-Irish idiom. They're also a married couple, currently on tour together with the entire family in tow. We caught up with them recently in Fairfax, Virginia during their current Masters of the Fiddle tour. They sat down with me to talk about their music, their family, and the faith that unites it all. Here's my interview with Natalie MacMaster and Donnell Leahy. This is the first time you all are touring together for an extended period, 50-city tour. I haven't seen you in a while. And you're traveling not alone, but with all your little ones, 3 now. Tell me what that's like and how this tour came about.
Well, first of all, it's incredibly exciting. Second of all, when I answer all these questions, you're going to hear this tired old mother's voice crackling because of lack of sleep. But it's truly a dream for us. When we got married 7 years ago, we talked about being able to play music together and tour together and had dreams of that, but we're booked 2 years in advance by our agents, and even this tour was booked 2 years ago. So it's often hard, you can't just stop everything and go because it takes time to come about. And Mary Frances is 4 now, Michael's 2.5, Claire just turned a year. So when Mary Frances was born, and then the next one comes along, just life gets in the way and you end up postponing or putting off things like we all do. So now that it's here and we're traveling as a family, and the tour bus picked us up at her home a few nights ago, and normally either I'm going or you're going, but this time we were touring together and taking all our family, so there wasn't anything but excitement and joy and happiness.
That's kind of like a family adventure where I'm sure you dread, I mean, I know from traveling, you dread being away because after a few days, you miss the family, you miss the kids. But everybody's in tow here. But it comes with its own challenges, I'm sure.
It does. Our children are always with one of us. They're always one of us. They're not at home. But it is an adventure, and you know, our children are most important to us, way ahead of the music, far ahead of the music. So when we were married and then we started having children, it's our big question, you know, what are we going to do? And it was let's just try it out and see what happens, and when it becomes hard on the children or bad for the children, then we will stop or change. And we've just discovered all these new things, new adventures with the little ones. I mean, I can't imagine being on tour without them now. My family, whom I spend most of my touring,
Your siblings.
My siblings, whom I spend a lot.
And you're one of 11.
One of 11, yeah.
Lahey, of course.
Well, my sister said the other day, she said, imagine if we didn't have children on the road. I mean, wouldn't be a tour anymore.
Are they near? I mean, you have them backstage during the show. Do you bring them, put them in the wings? What happens?
Very, all of the above. Sometimes, depending on the time of their nap, they might be sleeping during the show, or if they're awake, we'll try and get them to watch the show as much as we can. But there's one babysitter and 3 kids, and 2 of them are so little. Like Claire just being a year and Michael 2.5. He's got a bee in him all the time, so to speak. But Mary Frances, who's 4, she could sit and watch a whole show by herself.
Now, you all have both been at this fiddle game for a good long time. How have being parents, and let's start there, married and being parents, how has that deepened or changed your music?
Well, I do savor my musical moments now, more than I did before. Like all you mothers out there, being on stage now is like a day at the spa.
That's your time out. Okay.
It is really me time, but it's me time. You're still giving. You're giving to the crowd, but in giving, you're receiving from them.
Donnell, for you though, this must be very organic. I mean, you always traveled with the family. Your family, Lahey, is part of your traveling troupe. So I guess this has kind of been an easier transition for you, or no?
I would say it's been an easier transition for me. Yeah, we've had, you know, from showing up at the venue, we've been dealing with the children thing, the children's room, the naps, the food for the children, you know, the preparation before. But I watched my sisters, and
who would bring their children on the road.
Absolutely. And when it's your own, although I was more prepared, you know, the biggest transition I found was getting prepared for my show. I mean, I have I've got into these habits of warming up and spending the day getting prepared for the show. And, you know, an hour before the show, that's my time completely. And now it might be 5 minutes some nights. And it's to get ready to put on that show.
is a soulfulness about this music. And I want to talk a little about that because you both have very different styles too. Maybe we should talk about that first. I mean, you are Cape Breton and you are Irish music personified. How do these styles fit? And has that been difficult, finding that harmony in the approaches to music?
Well, my roots are Irish. My father's people came from Ireland in 1825. Mum is from Cape Breton. And although I started in those two styles, I play by ear. And we grew up in an area in Canada that didn't have a prevalent musical style. It was like we had a home without a television. We grew up on a farm, and we played together, and we heard music from all over the world. Our parents kept feeding us just music. So we started to develop our own little thing. If you play by ear, you can't help but be affected by what you hear. So that would come out in our music. Natalie, Cape Breton. And we can take the same tune, play it together, and we started this way, played the same tune together, and we were terrible because we stepped on each other. You know, the styles just like all the great little things Natalie did, I was doing something over top of them, or Natalie was on me. Yeah. So we had to take a little step back and say, whoa, we just...
Gee, we don't sound very good together. Now what?
But it forces us to think about our music.
Well, it's magical to hear you all together.
We've managed to figure it out. That's what's been so exciting about this tour, is that those little challenges, we've kind of worked through them, and we have a show that we're very proud of, and that really really shows off and features both of our styles.
Tell me about your faith, your shared faith, and how that affects your routine and your work. I mean, I can hear, if you will, your faith shining through the work. In the depth of understanding, there is that X quality that one hears in your work and a very few other artists when the music is being played. How do you see that? How do you incorporate your faith into your daily routine and into your music?
Wow, that's a very layered question.
Yes.
Well, first of all, anything that you're hearing, I mean, God has given me the upbringing. He gave me the parents that I have and my surrounding that I grew up in. And none of the music that you're hearing, anything it's giving off isn't really intentional. It's just a natural product of my surroundings. My mom and dad are just beautiful, loving parents and brought us all up. I have two older brothers. They brought us up in a very traditional Catholic home. And my brothers still practice the faith very devoutly as well. But just trying to, the thing that I'm learning, especially with children now because life is so busy, the old saying that, you know, pray always, is really becoming more of my life because I don't have time to pray.
You don't have set aside time.
Yeah, like I try to, but that doesn't work very well. Something always comes up. So I'm discovering that throughout the day, I'm just trying to take notice of my environment or the situation that is happening around me and turn that into a prayer. Just even watching my children, they're little bursts of prayer themselves, the way they pull out of me so much joy and thankfulness and need for God.
And Donnell, there was an article I read where Natalie said you taught her how to do a little sign of the cross before you hit the stage. Is that a little routine you practice?
Yeah, it's a routine that I always do with my bow. I always bless myself, and I never told that to Natalie. I'd never really told that to anybody, and I guess people who see me enough.
It's very subtle.
Our faith is what's most important to us. It's what we want to give our children most. People see us as musicians and we're very second. We're musicians second. And so, you know, the natural questions are, do your children play? You know, we want to, the faith is what we're most, we most desire for the children.
There is a joy and buoyancy about your collective music and separate music that people need an uplift. They need a jolt and a little joy. And there's something about the style and approach of music that, I mean, I think that's why people are running after you and wanting to, you know, craving for you to continue touring. Do you have a sense of that? That people are almost more excited about your coming and about these performances because of the times they find themselves in?
People like what we're doing on this tour, and that's fine, but they seem to really like it. And we sometimes look at each other and say, what is it?
What did we do tonight?
It wasn't that good tonight, you know, or, you know.
Yeah.
And it has to be, people get a moment's break. People, I hope that people see Natalie and I as happy and as honest and as married, you know, and that they're getting a little bit of, they're getting something other than music out of what we're doing.
There is a joy, like when we meet people after the show, there's a different aura than after our individual shows, and people are kind of like light and giddy.
I think what they're seeing is love. I mean, they're seeing real love between spouses, which is something, I mean, this is a rare thing. You don't have many acts traveling around the country who are husband and wife. And kind of, you know, and I think, again, the beauty is because you're not bound to a script, because you have that improvisatory quality. I'm sure it changes every night, yes?
Yeah. Yeah, like we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's not scripted. It's relaxed and honest. That's what we want it to be. And so we try to change it up, try to impress each other, try to fool each other, try to, you know, it's a lot of fun.
Keep it fun for us.
So what's next? I hear somebody's working on a book.
Actually, it's done.
Oh, good.
So we're just, they're sending us the final copy, and then we get it pressed.
Right.
First of all, the book is about just mostly beautiful pictures, but just story of what it's like to grow up in a musical place, musical life.
Cape Breton.
Cape Breton Island. Although
Which a lot of people don't realize. It was a priest who sort of revived and maintained this style of playing, yes? Who was he? Father Rankin?
Father John Angus Rankin.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, Raymond, that's right. And then musically, I have a CD that's being mixed as we speak. My 11th recording. It's all traditional Cape Breton music. And Lahey is working on their new CD as well. They're in the studio now.
Tell us about that, Donnell.
Finding time to do it. We are learning to record. We've hopefully, when our time is up, we'll have learned how to record. But it, you know, so we're really enjoying this process. Lahey recorded before, and some of our projects were really grueling because we didn't know how to do it. We didn't know how we needed to do it. We figured that out now, so it's fun, and we're excited about the material. And once again, in the Lahey family, there are 26 little ones now. Wow. So that has become a real juggling act, you know. But Natalie and I are going to record together.
Oh, good.
We had hoped to have it for this tour, but time again didn't allow.
Yeah, but there's something about working together on the road that will probably make the recording richer. Yes?
Oh,
absolutely.
Yeah, good point. You know,
Absolutely.
It probably would have been premature had we done it before.
Yeah, so everything happens in time.
That's exactly right.
Thanks for being
Thank you very much.
Raymond.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank Natalie and Donnell. They're a fantastic couple, and their music is just incredible. Natalie and Donnell's Masters of the Fiddle tour is winding down, but there's still a few dates available. You really owe it to yourself to see them. They're incredible in person. For more information, visit their websites, Natalie at nataliemacmaster.com, and Donnell is at laheymusic.com. That's all the time we have for now. For updates and the occasional commentary, you can follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/Raymond Arroyo. And I now have a Facebook fan page. Don't ask me what it is, but it's there, and you can keep up with me there. And with Mother's Day approaching, why not give your mother ours? The prayers and personal devotions of Mother Angelica are at bookstores everywhere, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and your local Catholic bookstore, as well as EWTN Religious Catalog. Finally, for those of you in Austin, Texas, or in the vicinity, I'm appearing with Sarah Palin at a great pro-life event on April 29th. Full details are at RaymondArroyo.com. Until next week, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye now.